Right, I'll just let everybody get in. We've got some people joining us now. Right, give it 10 seconds or so and I will start on. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. We've got a really excellent number of people booked on, so really looking forward to talking to you all today. So yeah, I'll give us a start. So as I say, thank you for joining us. Really good turnout, and as I'm talking now, more and more people are joining, so they'll be jumping a few minutes in. So my name is Michael Grime, and I'm a senior project manager at Trueman Change. And welcome to our February 2024 edition of our Change Chat. The way that these work is that we pick a particular topic, we pull together an excellent panel, which we have today, and then we provide you with tips and expertise on said topic. So we like this session to be really, really informal, and we try and make it as interactive as possible. So if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to unmute yourself, put your hand up, or put a question in the chat, which I will be keeping an eye on throughout today. As you will have noticed, we do record these sessions, and everybody who is booked onto the session will receive a copy of the recording. So if for any reason you have to unexpectedly leave, or if you want to share this with anybody after, please, you can do so. In addition to that, the recording will also be made available on our website, which is www.truemanchange.co.uk. And also we will be promoting the recording on LinkedIn, and it will also be on our YouTube page. Just to make you aware that the recording will only pick up those who are speaking. That's the way we've set it. So as I've said, if you don't want to be recorded and you do have a question, just feel free to pop it in the chat. So a bit of an introduction to today. So at Trueman Change, we predominantly work with local authorities, and as you will all be aware, we've seen an increase in pressure around budgets, but also an increase in demand and capacity. Historically, what would happen is the councils would, produce these bigger long-term council-wide transformation processes. However, because of the budgets as they are now, this isn't really an option anymore. So we are seeing this increase in service reviews in which councils are looking for a short, sharp piece of work to be able to look at a particular area and understand, really get to the bottom of what's going wrong and what can we do what can be done to make the service better, reduce potential complaints, and make the process and the service more cost effective. So as I've touched on today, we have got pulled together a panel who have got ample experience working on service reviews in a variety of different sectors. So I'll first off introduce myself, then I'll give a little brief introduction to Justin and Georgia, and then hand over to them to give a little bit more. So as I've said, my name is Michael Grime. I work for Trueman Change. So I've worked for Trueman Change as a senior project manager for probably, I'll round it up to about 18 months. So my background is predominantly around project management within local authorities such as police forces and also larger scale city councils. So within that time, I've worked in areas such as serious case reviews, safeguarding, crime prevention, and crime recording. But then also on top of that, during my time at Trueman Change, I've been looked at as our service review expert, and I've done service reviews within planning departments and also place portfolios. I really enjoy when completing service reviews, getting into the weeds and really understanding what's happening within an area and trying and working together to how we can make it better. So joining me on the call today, we've got Justin Hunt. So Justin is an associate of Trueman Change, and he is currently working with us on an ongoing project. Justin has worked in social housing for 30 years, mostly in local government, at a senior level, doing interim work and leading service change. We've also got Georgia Turner, who also is working with us as an associate at the moment. Georgia has over 25 years experience in communications, engagement, and leadership in local government, and she's restructured teams, merged teams, created new teams, and led service reviews for a number of councils across England. So finally, before we actually get into the nitty-gritty of today's topic, if you're sitting there and wondering, well, I'm not from housing, I'm not from comms, I'm not from engagement, I'm not from planning, how is this going to benefit me today? Well, we will be talking, yes, we'll be bringing in examples, but we will be talking quite generically about what we would do, tips and benefits, things like that. Also, on top of that, we have additional experts who aren't with us today, who work on a wide variety of additional specialisms such as finance, social care, environmental services. So if there is anybody else that you'd like to speak to, please give us a nudge after the call and we can put you in touch with them. So, Georgia, Justin, thank you for listening to that big introduction from me. So I've given you a bit of a brief introduction there. Do you want to give a bit of an introduction about yourself and talk about some of the service reviews that you've completed? Justin, you're on my screen, so I'll come to you first.
Well, thanks very much, Michael. I think housing is going through a very significant change process. It's fair to say that there's been a lot of housing situations in the news, and that has led to the sector having to look at itself, understand the way it's delivering its services. It's also experiencing change in legislation as a response to some of the challenges that it's had. And it's now starting to have to adapt its services in order to be able to meet some of the expectations that's coming in from increased level of regulation. And as we know, regulation within the public sector is something that's frequent. It's increasing in many instances with legislation coming in. And so what I'm finding within housing is that people are having to do service reviews in order to be able to respond to that. And often it's not a quick fix or it's a short-term thing. There's something more fundamental that's needed. And so what local authorities are doing is they're bringing in subject matter experts in order to be able to do those deep dives. And it's not necessarily about the housing service. It can be, the service can be very good, but there are one or two aspects of it which need to be reviewed and improved. And so what we're finding, what I'm finding, what Trueman Change is finding is that we're being asked to go in there. And a lot of it's about asking the question, which is, what is it that you need, as much as what it is that we're able to provide, because operating in a very agile way is something that is necessary within the public sector at the moment, and very specifically in housing. And so working with the existing leadership, with the existing teams, and implementing those service reviews is something that we're doing more and more of, and being very successful in terms of making sure that we can deliver those outcomes.
Yep, great stuff. Thanks, Justin. Georgia, same question for yourself.
Thanks, Michael. Hi, everybody. Yeah, I'm Georgia. So as Michael said, my background is local authority, comms, marketing, engagement. Probably the biggest change I've been involved in was making the case for structural change down here in Dorset. And we had 9 local authorities back in the mid-teenies, as we call them, about 2014, making a case for reducing the 2-tier and 2 unitary structure down to 2 unitary authorities. So that was successfully made case. And then the huge task of reviewing and creating a team from existing teams within Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole Council. Of course, that had to be one of the services ready for go live day, because we had to make sure we were speaking with a single unified voice on behalf of the new organisation, and do that launch piece for the new organisation in time for the 1st of April 2019. So that's probably the biggest change, and comms team review that I've been involved with. So lots of experience that we can bring to any review work that you might have for your comms teams in local government around the country.
Great, thank you. And that merging of all the various councils is something that I'll quiz you on a little bit later as well. So good opening point. So at Trueman Change, as I say, we have a wide range of experience when it comes to completing service reviews, and the way that we work on them is we break it into 3 main areas, and we focus on these 3 main areas throughout. One of which is performance, looking at the facts, looking at the data, looking at how the actual team is doing at that time. The second one is process. What is going on? What's the day-to-day look like? Is there a main task that's running through that team that is, running from A to Z? How is that working? Looking at it, breaking it into several little pieces. And then the third one is people, looking at the culture of the team. Is that a barrier? What's happening at the moment that's affecting people's performance and people's attitudes, and overall culture. So the first one I want to touch on is performance, as the first one in the list there. So the example I found from completing service reviews is it's really important to understand data. I've just completed a big service review for a planning organisation within Lancashire, which is probably something I'll use as an example a lot today, because I completed the report a few weeks back, so it's really fresh in the mind. But you know, as I say, it's really important to understand the data. You're not just looking at what it is, but you're drumming down into that data. What does it mean? So if you have a situation where only 60% of applications are meeting their targeted deadline, you know, a 13-week deadline, only 60% are meeting, why? What's happening? What is preventing that from happening? And that will come in as part of process and people as well. So, but that quantitative data, as key as that is, there's also a need for qualitative data as well. So what we tend to do as part of performance is we have a look at the external factors. What are the external people thinking as part of that? And one of the key things I like to look at is feedback. Feedback from service users, feedback from customers. You know, take that wider customer perspective into account when looking at performance. So Georgia, Justin, I'll come to Georgia first. In your particular specialist areas, are there any examples of key data which are required, and why is that so important when completing service reviews?
Well, I would say very much for comms teams, it's sometimes that very operational element. So for comms, one of our kind of panaceas is often how do we measure our impacts? How do we measure what it is we're trying to achieve? And then there's the kind of the outputs, the what have we done, what have we achieved? There are the outcomes, how have people, the outtakes, how have people reacted to that? Are we getting positive sentiment? Are we getting negative sentiment? And then there are the outcomes. What do people do as a result? And quite often it's very tricky to prove how did communications really influence that, as opposed to the other interventions that we're putting in, because mostly the work that we would do, we on behalf of the service, we on behalf of the council as a whole, and those services will be putting in their own interventions. If we're doing a housing campaign, for example, to get people to and they report issues more with their social housing, for example, there'll be interventions the housing service is putting in too. So what data are we taking from them? What data are we taking about a campaign we might have done, for example, in terms of, you know, what's our responsibility, what's the service responsibility, and how do we marry those up? I think another big issue in terms of performance for comms and looking at that data is that balance between responsive and planned work. You always have to have space for responsive and reactive work in the comms environment, whether that's, again, an operational thing, just capacity to deal with stuff coming in on social media, inquiries from the local press, all those kind of things, right down to responsive. The government makes an announcement which impacts on your local authority and you didn't know about. What's the organisation's position on that? Have you got the capacity to respond? All those things are quite, you know, those very responsive things are quite tricky to measure. Yes, you can measure media inquiries. Yes, you can measure social media, those kind of things. But the unknown unknowns that come from nowhere that comms has to be ready for, it's very tricky to collate and measure the data on that.
Yeah, so from a housing perspective, data is absolutely fundamentally part of what we do. There's a huge amount of data that we've got to collect and got to submit, this is increasing, and analysing that in the first instance is the starting point. It's just that the service review needs to go beyond what it is that the data is saying, because so often the challenge is the fact that the data isn't necessarily telling the whole story. There's so much that we do within housing which is all focused on quality and what the outcome is for people's lives. And people, as we know, can be very complex, whether it be the staff that's delivering the service or the residents that are receiving it. And so relying purely on the data can be, you know, something where there has to be caution applied to it. There has to be more depth taken as to what it is that's led to that data being produced in the way that it has, and what is it that's telling us, and then triangulating that against what it is that the residents are saying and what the staff are saying. And where we do become just data driven, that can have challenges and create problems further down the line. And often that's when there's a need for extra capacity to come in there to dig deep beneath it rather than just responding to what the data is saying. So it can be more complex and is more complex when you have data, but then you overlay that with a whole collection of humans, all of whom have their individual needs.
Coming back in on that, Michael, I think kind of a further point on that really is around data's just data. It's when you apply that level of insight, it's what so what does the data actually tell us? And I think, like as Justin's saying, what is the human interaction of that? What is the interpretation of that takes it beyond the numbers, and gets us that the numbers can tell us the what, but we really want to understand the why of the, and that's where that quantitative qualitative balance of data comes in, to look at right at the beginning around what is the problem here that we're trying to solve, and have we got any insight around the causes of those problems? Is it actually team performance, or has there been a huge spike in inquiries or demand for the service, and how are we going to respond to that? What's the cause of that? Is it temporary? Is it permanent? Is it because legislation has changed? What might it be that's driving that?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And just, summarizing basically on the data element, as you've both touched on, it is that. And just repeating basically what you've just said, Jordan, it's drill into the data. Don't just believe what you've got written on a piece of paper in front of you. It's understanding it a little bit more. So the next step number 2 is understanding the process. So I must admit that I am a massive fan of process mapping. I am a real big fan of getting people in a room, getting teams in a room and going through a process from start to finish. I've had feedback, I think probably everybody's had feedback of, people have heard that this is what's happening, or this consulting company is coming in and they're going to put us in a room and we're going to start from start to finish, and people have rolled their eyes. But actually at the end, when we've got the feedback, we've been told that it's such a useful exercise. However, a lot of what we have found is when we've liaised with people is when completing a process mapping exercise, people concentrate solely on internal. But one thing I would recommend when completing a process mapping exercise is that you actually complete it alongside a customer mapping journey. So to give you an example of this, when we recently completed the planning applications, we were going through the process with the team and they were saying, yeah, at this stage, the customer gets notified that the application has moved to its next step. However, when we dived in a little bit deeper with that and we actually took the customer's accounts into perspective, we actually found that the customers didn't fully understand what these notifications meant. So on paper, from the internal side, it's great we're notifying them, but externally, the customers actually didn't understand. So process mapping, as key as it is, it's really important to understand that from the customer, not just internally. So opening up to the group, do you have any tips for completing process mapping? Have you got examples of it working well?
Michael, thanks very much for that. It's absolutely fundamental in terms of the complexity that happens within housing. So there are so many different handoffs. People can have an initial inquiry. There can be many routes in terms of which they can communicate with the service, and it is often the case that it's very difficult to deal with that at that moment in time. And where we start to struggle is when those handoffs don't result in an outcome that resolves the problem for the person. And as we all know, if you fail to deal with something quickly in the first instance so that it becomes part of the machine, then the cost that can escalate within the service can be significant. And if you get more and more coming in, then it has the potential to very quickly undermine the service. So an example of where that can happen within housing is you start to get yourself the wrong side of a reactive repairs service. So people are phoning in, they've got challenges that they're experiencing. We're then looking to resolve them, but we're not able to resolve them quickly enough. That generates a complaint coming in or a chase up phone call, etc. And then That then starts to bog down the administrative processes, and we find ourselves with a backlog of repairs, and the whole thing escalates because we're not resourced to be able to do that. So understanding that journey map and making sure that we can resolve the repair right first time is really, really important to avoid a situation where we're starting to struggle and not meet demand.
I'd say for comms, one of the big process issues is around almost the opposite of your handoff, Justin. That the work coming in, is there a strategy there that prioritizes what the big things that you're going to be working on this year are? Have you determined what they are? And they should, of course, link to your organizational priorities, your corporate narrative, your big strategic pieces that the organization's working on. That's the theory. What we find quite often is because of the responsive nature of local authorities, because of the political nature of local authorities, because comms teams tend to be very close to the working very closely with the political leadership as well as the officer leadership. If there's a political imperative, what's the process for getting that in? If it doesn't fit with a strategic stated priority already, but you've got the leader saying, and it happens all the time, it's not a once a year thing, it's a once a month thing. Leaders require this, and and leaders need it now. So what's your process for dealing with those and responding effectively to that, as well as those really operational processes around where do you free up the capacity, what do you stop doing, how do you deprioritize in those? So for comms teams, I'd say it's the biggest processes, less operational and very much around prioritizing, capacity building, and making sure that you are still focusing on those big strategic issues. If you've got a campaign that's going live next week, it's going live next week, no matter what the leader has come in and said they need, or a senior officer. And part of that, again, it's cultural. Is the organization in a space where culture says we do because, or culture says actually it's not in the plan? Or is there actually a happy medium in between, which is what you probably need? It says, of course, we know we need to be responsive, but not necessarily how quick and how high. So I would say for comms team, it's that incoming prioritization and process that is one of the most challenging things we find.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think one thing as well in regard to process mapping that I found is it's key to do it with the team. So and doing that, it creates a shared sense of ownership within the team. So what we've heard and from customers that we currently have is they've previously had consultation companies come in, and they've basically taken the process and gone and sat in a room and gone all amongst themselves and gone, right, they should cut that, they should cut that, they should cut that, and then taking it back to the team, and the team's basically been told, right, this is what you're doing. Whereas if you co-design the process with the team will then feel that their voice is being heard, and they can make the recommendations. So one thing that we've recently found is we sat with this team and co-designed their process with them. And there was a particular woman within the team who'd had this idea in her head and this recommendation for, she said years, but I don't know if it was that long or not. She'd had this recommendation, but she never felt at the time was right to raise it with management. So we were sat in this room and we went from it to A to Z, and she brought it up and she recommended this thing that was actually something that got used as part of the new process. So that key working with them makes everybody, it improves culture, which we're going to come on, but it also improves that co-design. And at the end of the day, they are the people that are dealing with these issues every single day. They are the people that has to, as part of a process, know that the computer systems might be poor. They see the bottlenecks, they understand it. So I think one big tip as well for myself is to ensure that you include the teams within it. I don't know if you've any experience of co-designing with teams, Justin or Georgia.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. Absolutely. One of the first conversations that I have is to go out and have a cup of tea with a caretaker, or a conversation with a plumber or a carpenter, etc., and understand how they see the service. And you get a significant level of honesty coming through when you have those conversations, some of which can be quite uncomfortable. just pick up on George's point in terms of, you know, the leaders. It's often the same thing that the leaders will do. You know, they will speak to the frontline staff, and they're very good at it. And you know, the frontline staff will be very honest in terms of the challenges that they're experiencing around being able to do their job. And it's absolutely right that you know, part of the questions that we ask ourselves is, what is it that we can do in order to be able to facilitate them doing their jobs more easily? And if, in the case of a caretaker, for example, they spend quite a lot of time having to interact with other parts of the service in order to be able to achieve what it is that they need to on behalf of the residents. And so if they're struggling with certain aspects of it, then the residents are going to be struggling with it. So getting that insight and getting representatives from the frontline staff to act as that check and balance around what it is that we're trying to achieve and how well it's working is fundamental.
Yeah, I totally agree. That co-creation with the teams is, you know, you're going to set yourself up to fail otherwise. It's just a desk exercise if you don't do that, because very often, you know, like the lady that had the idea for 10 years, you know, they will know what the problems are. They will have the frustrations, you know, they will. And I think by having a subject matter expert come in and do a kind of spotlight on a specific service, you know, hopefully we do position ourselves when we go in we're critical friends here. You know, we want to understand what the problem is, what is it we're trying to achieve, what do we need to solve and fix by coming in to do this review, because there's a driver for it, there's a reason you're doing it. But equally, we also understand pressures of your work. We know what the challenges are. We know what the difficulties are. We understand that, and we can advocate for good practice when we find it, as well as make the case for we can bring this learning in from elsewhere, because we've done a lot of these reviews and we saw this here and it could work really well here. What do you think about that? And quite often you'll find people have, like you say, they might have that nugget in the back of their head. They've been holding on to it for a while. They haven't had the capacity to raise it because they're busy doing the day job. And when you have a subject matter come in to do a service review, I think it feels very different to kind of those big corporate reviews that you talked about at the outset, Michael, where it's a little bit of a one size fits all process. We do it this way, and we're doing it this way for the whole organization because we're taking an enterprise view, you know. And actually that doesn't work if you want to spotlight on something, because every service is different. Every service has its unique, you know, processes, people, performance issues that need to be looked at. By tailoring that approach to that service and involving the people who ultimately have got to buy into this, because if you just do it to them, you're onto hiding to nothing before you get started.
Yeah, absolutely, definitely agree. We've had our first question from Viv. Thank you, Viv. What do you find is the best way to facilitate process mapping sessions? Face-to-face, large workshop, one-to-ones, large pieces of paper and sticky notes? I'll open to you two.
All of the above. I would say, really. I think it partly depends on what do you want. You, like you say, you ask the team, what do you want, or the commissioner, what it is that you're looking to get out of it, and then you'll tailor your engagement methods to suit what it is we're trying to explore here. I'm a great fan of face to face. I think it acts as a team. You get so much. The teams get so much more out of it, almost like a team building session, as well as and a bit of a therapy session for them quite often, as well as actually doing the job that we're here to do. So I think you do get added value from face to face work. I do also think it's quite important to split out those stakeholder groupings when you're doing that. So actually having a separate session with a head of service, having a separate session with management, as well as all your external client stakeholders, and having a separate session with the teams, because you'll get a different perspective then. You know, it's about that safe space, whether it's digital and online or whether it is face to face. It's very much about what is the safe space that's going to work here for people to feel that they can contribute as much as possible, they can be as open as possible, because if you don't get that input, then it's bad in, bad out, isn't it? You need to facilitate those inputs to be able to make great recommendations for improvement.
Yeah, just following on from that, Georgia, I completely agree. It's exactly the approach that I adopt as well. So my view is that what I'm looking for from those sessions is the thinking. So if I can get from whichever, whether it be a group of staff or individual members of staff, when we're trying to sort of work out what the underlying issue is, and therefore work through what it is that we're trying to do to reach a solution. It's if the thinking is coming out in a clear way, the tool with which we then use to capture that is secondary. And if that person feels more comfortable with Excel, with Word, with PowerPoint, with Visio, with Miro, whatever tool it is that we use, pen and paper, flip charts, whiteboard, the tool needs to adapt to the culture and the thinking of that particular person or group. And as we know, every human being tends to sort of, learn and communicate in slightly different ways and has different preferences. And so being led by them so that they're comfortable tends to achieve the best outcome.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll agree with that. The example with what Georgia and Justin have said, the example that we've done recently, it was face to face in a room. We went through the planning process from start to finish, broke it into 4, said, right, look at that group, look at that process, that from there to there, feedback, look at that process, feedback, and that worked really, really well, and it got some really good conversations. So that's our experience on that. And just had a comment from Trueman Change's Jenny, who has said Miro is excellent for online facilitation as well. So there's a little bit of advice for anyone who'd like to try some online facilitation of process mapping. I touched on it before. So Georgia, I know you mentioned you got a lot of experience of merging different councils. Can you give us some examples of your experience of this and how this can work well and what you did?
Well, very similar to service review, really. I mean, I've done reviews of a single team, myself, of my own team, and I've done reviews of other people's team, other organisations' teams. It's much harder when you're doing it with your own team, much harder, which is why getting in an organisation as a critical friend works so well, because when you're doing it for your own team, of course, you've got subconscious bias probably. You've got relationships established. You've got preconceptions, which is very difficult to get past when it's your own team. You have to do it if that's the way the organization's decided it's doing it. You're doing the review. So that's about talking to people, and of course all that background knowledge is useful. You have the history, you do know who's good at what, you do know people's ambitions, you do have an awareness of where your gaps are, where your capacity gaps, your skills gaps, your tech gaps, whatever they might be, to be able to deliver the service. So in a way you can do it a bit quicker, but I think the problem with doing it yourself is the capacity, because the day job carries on. I don't think any head of comms has ever been told, don't worry about the day job for the next 3 months because we want you to focus on reviewing your service. I'd be amazed if anyone ever experienced that. I certainly haven't. So I would say, for me, it's felt like the best results are when you've got some of that critical friend there to because their job is to have the capacity to do the things that you want to do yourself, you should be doing, you're really desperate to do, but the latest thing from the leaders come in, or this strategy needs a launch, or whatever it might be, that the day job gets in the way. So really that pulling in that critical friend for me has I would say been one of the lifesavers, really, because like I say, they pick up the capacity that you don't have because there's only one of you. And you can balance across then, this is what I know, this is what I understand, this is what I think the problem is and the gaps are as the head of service or the leader of this service area. But what do you think? you know, is my lens the right lens? What's your lens on this? And what perspective can you bring from reviews elsewhere and from talking to my team? Because you'll get different information from them and different levels of relationships from them than I will get doing it myself. So I would say that if you can get that balance, then you're onto a bit of a winner.
Michael, you dropped out just for a second when you asked the question. I think I know what the question is, but I don't want to assume that that I'm answering the question. So do you want to just repeat it for me?
Did I answer it?
I think my question was around merging different councils. That was my question, but I don't know if you've kind of picked up on Matt's question there, have you, Georgia?
Oh no, not so much. So merging different councils, that really is probably a classic blend of performance, process, and people. So in a way, I would say that the process element from the team merging point of view, as opposed to the, you know, we need hours to talk about merging 3 councils, you know. But from a team perspective, actually the process element was relatively easy, because we would have teams of experts from across the team. So you 3 are the social media leads, you 3 are the media relations leads, you 3 are the campaign leads, you 2 are the internal comms leads, whatever it might be. This is what I want you to look at. What platforms do you use? What systems have you got in place? What do they cost? What volumes are you dealing with, et cetera, et cetera. Work together to come up with a recommendation for what we do within a new council. So they've got ownership, they're building their small team together, they're starting to know each other a bit better and working together. So that was actually the easiest part, because that was quite an operational piece. And again, partly linked to that was the performance element. So, you know, what of these processes and systems is going to give us the best outcome, is the most efficient way of publishing our social media content, responding to it, whatever it might be. The kind of process side of what are we going to work on, how are we going to structure ourselves, was a much harder, of course, because you've got people, different roles. It's very much like a restructure. So that's a lot more challenging. Fortunately, on day one, we weren't tasked with a financial saving. That did come later. And of course, that goes through a very, very formal process. But again, it's trying to have that forward look. What is the strategy here that the organization wants to achieve? Do we have skills gaps? Do we have capacity gaps? Do we have people who want to leave? Do we have people who want to develop? Do we need to recruit in? What are we looking at in terms of performance, so that we can deliver the skills that the corporate strategy says we need and our comm strategy says that we need? And then, of course, the people side is, how do we do this together? How do we create this in a way that's going to give us the culture we want working moving forward? Was that better?
That was good. That was great. Justin, have you got anything to add to what Georgia had said, or do you want to have
just from my own perspective. So within my career, the equivalents have been housing associations merging, or transferring stock from one association to another, or services getting contracted out back in the day, or ammo's coming back in-house, etc. So those are big organizational shifts, and I think it's very easy to look at it through the lens of it being a sort of big bang, because there has to be a day at which that whatever it is happens. But as Georgia was saying, the reality is that on that day one, the vast majority of what people have been doing, they've got to carry on doing. And that merger, that change, triggers a whole heap of effectively mini service reviews that need to be worked through methodically. And if you try to do it as a sort of one hit approach, that can often create quite a sort of trough in terms of service delivery, which can be quite time consuming to get itself out of. So in a way, in my experience, the way to do it is in a sort of calm, measured, prioritized way, so that you're not trying to do everything all at once, and then you can take all the systems, the processes, the teams with you.
Great, thank you. Matt, sorry, we had a bit of a Wi-Fi issue there. So if you don't feel like your question's been answered fully, please put it back in or ask any further questions. I dropped out a little bit then, so I apologize about that. So we'll move on to the third aspect, which I know we've mentioned it quite a lot today, but that is around people. So what we find and what we've been told is that culture and people are often neglected during a service review because the councils focus more on the process and performance when, as Lucy says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So basically that means that you can design the best process you can possibly design, but if the culture isn't right, it's just not going to work. So Georgia and Justin, what are your reflections on culture? And I know we touched on it a little bit, but what are your reflections on culture and people, the people side of service reviews?
I'm happy to go first. I think what I've learned over the years is that it's very hard to understand what it is that you're going to be experiencing when you're looking to move into an organization and either lead a team or carry out a service review. What it is that is communicated to you in the first instance is not necessarily what it is that you're going to be experiencing. And trying to anticipate and predict what it is that you're going to be experiencing around people and control and culture can also be very difficult as well, because I've found over the years is that you can go into organizations that are running really well, but there are specific challenges around culture and behaviors that don't reflect what appears to be the service that's being delivered on the outside. Equally, I've gone into scenarios where it looks like the service that's being delivered is very poor, and it is very poor, but actually you've got a group of people who are really positive and constructive and collaborative and want to get the job done. And what's led to the poor service can be a whole load of stuff that's very much beyond their control, but fundamentally the way their behaviors and the culture is very positive. And everything in between, there can be apathy, there can be frustration, there can be conflict, and in some instances where they've experienced perpetual change, there's a degree of exhaustion that's taking place. So making assumptions around culture and people and process is sometimes unwise, and you often find yourself then discovering something completely different. So that's why you've then got to take the time in order to be able to have those conversations, understand it from different people's perspectives, and then work with them in a collaborative way in order to be able to understand what it is that organization, that team, those individuals need in order to be able to move that service forward.
Yeah, 100% agree with that. If you don't take your people with you, I know I feel like I sound like a bit of a stuck record on this one, and people will probably all know this, but you don't take them with you. It's a review for review's sake. They'll all nod, and the task and finish piece of the review will be done. But actually, nothing will change. So really, just to echo exactly what Justin said, but I did want to pick up a bit on Matt's question actually, because I think it's a super interesting question actually, because when you're the head of service, you are kind of stuck in the middle a bit, aren't you? Because you've got it coming from above and the sides, and you've got it the pressure coming from your team below. And it kind of depends. Do you agree with the chief exec? Do you have some persuasion and some work to do with your chief exec around what their expectation management is? Because part of that, your role in head of service, I think, is expectation management. Bit of brokerage. Come on, guys. Let's work together to do some more in this area, because actually we've done some benchmarking externally. We can see that there is some room for improvement here, but actually I'll go back, I'll put my head above the parapet for you with the chief on these things, because actually maybe he or she is being unrealistic about something. Maybe they can't have everything, and that it's a brave thing to do, but I think actually at a head of service level is quite important that you broker that balance of expectation management with your team, and across the wider organisation and up towards the chief exec, the senior leadership, and the elected members. And sometimes having an external review really does help you do that, because that brings in that element of benchmarking. Like I said at the earlier about the advocacy, doesn't necessarily pull its punches in a kind way, if there's such a thing, in terms of, this is how we can help you improve. And actually, maybe you should have a process in place for this, or maybe this could be more efficient, or maybe you have got a skills gap here. But actually, you are really good at these things over here. And we could hold you up as a benchmark for others to learn from in this space. So, you're helping them to kind of play back to the senior leadership. This is what reasonable expectation is. This is what good looks like. And the team combines that too, because they are seeing that learning coming from elsewhere, rather than just it's a top-down thing that says you've got to be better. Nobody wants to hear a top-down thing that says you've got to be better, even if it's true. It's how you manage that process and that story and that engagement to get people to acknowledge that and think, okay, yes, I can see that, and I want to do it. I want to improve. I can see how to improve, and I want to contribute to how we get there.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. Just wanted to touch on one of something we also offer as part of our service reviews, and we don't necessarily do for all service reviews. It depends on budgets, time constraints, etc. But we also do a culture mapping exercise with teams. So for those of you who haven't been involved in a culture mapping exercise, we'll go in to meet the teams, probably similar to how we would as part of the process review. I've run some workshops and pull out some examples on how the team feel that culture is at that time. And then what we'll do is we'll pull that into a report, and then we'll take it to management, and we can say to you, A, is this how you thought the culture was within your team? B, is this how you want the culture to be? And 9 times out of 10, we find that the answer, what is happening is not what management expected. And culture is happening every second of every day in a workplace. One thing that always sticks out with me in regard to culture is in one of my first jobs, I worked in a big open plan office. And we've probably all been in a similar situation as I'm going to give here, but there was a manager who would walk in at the same day, walk in at 8:30 every single day. And she would either walk in with a smile on her face, or she'd walk in with a frown on her face. And that would then dictate the feeling of the entire office. She had no idea that this is the power that she had and how it impacted on everybody. But it grabbed a hold, and it really led the team for the remainder of the day. Don't know if there's any similar experiences that the two of you have where you've seen culture, how it negatively grasps a team, and any that you could, without naming names, obviously, and how you could share that with the group as some examples today.
Yes, so I think that example is a great one to give, because it illustrates the challenge and the importance of leadership. And so yeah, the behaviours of the leaders are very important. And I think that what's really interesting that I've found over the years is that there are also, it's not necessarily the obvious person that's the leader and their behaviours. Within any culture, within any environment, you'll find that there are 1 or 2 or 3 individuals who are really very influential in terms of the behaviours and the way the people choose to interact with each other. And so understanding who it is that are going to be the key influencers within a team, within a service, is really, really important. And then making sure that you understand how those people operate, what it is that they think, what it is that they need, and what it is that they're influencing, and then bring them on board. And if they become the change agents, then all of a sudden you get a very different outcome.
Yeah. Anything from you, Georgia?
Yeah, I think one of the dangers that we talked earlier about a little bit about skills mapping, but there's also the character mapping. And one of the dangers that we find people or teams fall in is managers sometimes will recruit not quite in their own image, but you suddenly find that you've got a team of extroverts, for example, or the opposite, and that means all your kind of your ways of working are very much driven by a certain personality type, for example, which isn't necessarily healthy for the way that the teams work. And also, a good example I'll throw in is one team I worked in, or reviewed, not worked in, sorry, reviewed, was there was a person there who was brilliant at what they did. They were technically fantastic. They were a real perfectionist. They worked really hard. The outputs were fantastic. Everybody loved the work that they did. Oh my goodness, this work is brilliant. We're put it up there as gold standard. But their behaviors were poor. So they would blow up in the office. Those sort of they wouldn't let things go, and really the ripple effect of this one person's behavior was really quite significant. But what the teams were saying was because the outputs of this person were so good, the manager wasn't tackling the behaviors because they didn't want to lose, or the outputs they were getting, they saw the outputs as really strong. And so as a leader, you need to do both. You need to tackle both. You need to say, I expect these outputs, but I don't expect these behaviors, and this is why, and this is the impact that you're having. And actually that person, I'm sure if they knew the impact they were having, they would have been devastated, because they obviously cared about their work, because their work was of good quality.
No, that's a really good example. Thank you. So we're kind of coming towards the end. I've just got my eye on time. We've got 9 minutes until we finish. So we've obviously got into a bit of detail in each one of the three main areas as as I outlined at the start: performance, process, and people. I think the panel here have given some really good examples on how we can make service reviews work. Quickly, as we come towards the end, opening to Georgia and Justin, if you had one last top tip, quite short, for everyone here today on how to complete service reviews, what would that be?
Involve your people. Involve your people, because they will 90% of the answers they will have.
Oh, so I'm going to have to come up with another top tip now, because that was what I was going to say. Well, always ask always ask a caretaker would be my starting point. So as I say, go back to the point I made earlier. That the leaders are very, very good at having those conversations with the frontline members of staff, and it can be quite uncomfortable when you're having that conversation with the leader and you're not aware of what it is that's being discussed amongst the frontline teams, and you don't appear to have a handle in terms of what's going on. So, those informal conversations around what it is that they're experiencing, and then focusing. If you then focus on what it is that's needed to facilitate them to be able to do their jobs, that can often, not always, but it can often go some distance to resolving a lot of the service issues and making the service run more efficiently.
That's great. And to be honest, mine was going to be involve your teams as well. So I'll go for another one, and I'll say really dive deep into your data and fully understand what your data means. I'll use that as mine as well. So I just wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you very much to Georgia and Justin today. Thank you very much for everybody coming to listen and join the call. We've had a really good turnout, so really happy about that. So a couple of dates for your diary. We have got 2 future change chats. On Friday the 22nd of March, we have Doing Change Well, where Lucy will be back in the hot seat for that one. And then on Friday the 26th of April, Georgia will be back for our comms and engagement change chat. And Sarah has just thank you, Sarah, has just put the link into the chat for both of those change chats. So if you want to book on there, please do so. Or alternatively, links can be found on our website or social media pages. It's also worth mentioning that on our website, we have some excellent guides, such as the change readiness assessment, and we have case studies of our previous work. So if you want to hear more about our For example, the planning review that we've just done, process review, then have a look on their service review. Sorry, if you want to look at the planning service review on there, which we've recently just written a case study and put that up there. As I mentioned at the start, you will now all receive an email, including a link to the recording of the change chat. That will probably come from myself. Following that, if you would like to have a chat with either myself, one of the panel here today, or Lucy, then please let us know. As I mentioned as well, we have a few other specialisms where we didn't have associates on the call today, or we can point you towards the right person if you have any questions that you want to ask. Finally, Lucy has written a report recently about what change looks like in local government, and that will be coming available on our website very soon, so please keep an eye on that. So if we have no more questions, and thank you very much for your lovely comments coming into the chat right now, much appreciated. I will say thank you once again, and I hopefully look forward to seeing you at a future change chat. Thank you all. Take care.